In this video, we're going to discuss how to assess communicative competence for advanced learners of English. So communicative competence is more than just language, right? We have the linguistic competence, that's the first of the four competence areas. That's to do with actual language, getting the words right, getting the grammar right. But everything else is a bit broader than that. Socio-linguistic, discourse competence, up to strategic competence. And if we want to assess an English speaker's ability in all of those different competence areas, we can't do it in the classic English teacher way, because that involves pretty much just counting the mistakes. If you think about beginners in the foreign language or intermediate level learners, the key point holding them back in their communication is lack of vocab and lack of grammatical knowledge. We've all been there. If you've learned a foreign language, that is the stuff you have to deal with first. But as you get to a more advanced level, is it really the grammar and the vocab that's holding you back? Or could it be other things, other aspects which find a place in this communicative competence theory? So if we move beyond the linguistic competence and we say, right, it's not just about making mistakes, it's also about other things, then we have to figure out, how do you assess that? Can you create some kind of criteria for assessing something like socio-linguistic competence or discourse competence or indeed strategic competence? And I think you can, but you have to judge each act of communication not by some sort of objective scale, but by the extent to which the communicative act achieves the purpose that it sets out to achieve. So why do we communicate? Maybe we're trying to explain something. Maybe we're trying to persuade somebody to see things a different way. Maybe we're analysing. Maybe we're just entertaining. But we always have a purpose. Effective communication achieves the purpose it's setting out to achieve. So that's one way by which we can judge how effective a piece of communication is. But the purpose isn't the only element here. What about the person listening to you, or the reader reading your email or reading your writing? What about their perspective? So alongside the purpose, we also have to think about audience. This can be one person or a group of people, depending on who you're communicating with. Achieving a certain purpose for different audiences requires different use of language. And of course, achieving different purposes for the same audience also requires different use of language. So if we start looking at every linguistic act as having a purpose and an audience, and the purpose is what needs to be achieved, that's why you're communicating, the audience is who you're communicating to, then we're starting to build up a framework by which we could judge communicative acts in terms of holistic communicative competence. So we have the why, this is the purpose, and we have the who, the audience. The next point is to think about what you're going to say or what you're going to write. This is your content. And how you select that content, the decisions that you make, will determine how effectively you achieve your purpose for your audience. Making the right call on which pieces of content to include, which to leave out, how much detail, are we talking more human aspects, are we talking more process aspects? All of these things, all of these decisions about content help you achieve your purpose for your audience. So purpose, audience, content. There's one piece left in this puzzle, not what we're saying or writing, but how we're saying it or how we're writing it. This we can call form. So form is how you choose to put into words the thoughts, the concepts, the content in your head. And it's a really important element. Having the idea in your head is only half the battle. Choosing the right words with which to express that idea is also a key element in attempting to achieve a given purpose for a certain audience. So when you look at these four elements of communication, purpose, content, audience, form, you can make a differentiation between the elements which you have control over as a speaker or writer and the elements that you have no control over. And there's two factors in each of those groups. So in terms of what you can control when you're speaking or writing, we're talking content and form. What you say, how you say it. What you write, how you write it. Those are your tools. That's the stuff you have complete control over, which means getting those decisions right is on you as the communicator. On the other hand, you have the other two elements, your audience and your purpose. And this is stuff that we cannot directly control. But that's not a bad thing, because understanding that you can't directly control and determine those elements actually makes you a much more effective communicator. What does that mean? Well, let's talk about audience. A key problem when people communicate badly is that they make assumptions about the position, the ideas, the thoughts, the motivation of the people they're talking to or the people they're writing to. People assume that they have a level of control over their audience they don't actually have. And then people like to say things like, well, I wrote it clearly, you didn't understand it, or I said it like that and you should have understood this. But by saying that, you should have understood it, you should have thought this, you're implying that somehow you have control over your audience where you don't. And if we accept that the success of a communicative act is ultimately down to what arrives with the reader or what arrives with the listener, and we embrace that fact, celebrate that fact, it makes us so much better because we start focusing on the actual situation of our audience. We don't superimpose our own ideas. We don't imagine how we would react. We actually think about how they are going to react. So accepting the fact that you can only ever indirectly influence your audience, you cannot compel them to understand your words a certain way or to understand your email a certain way. They're going to understand it how they understand it. But if you accept that fact, you'll become a better writer and a better speaker. In terms of purpose, we may think, well, surely we're in control of why we're saying something. But I'm not sure if it is that way. Generally speaking, life puts you in a position where you're compelled to communicate a certain way. If there's been a misunderstanding and you have to explain something, then you have to explain it. You can't change that into an act of entertaining communication. You're just going to confuse people. So life presents situations, circumstances that you have to deal with. And if you are able as a communicator to figure out, okay, I am persuading somebody here, this is an analytical moment, or I'm explaining, and you understand that, and you accept that, again, you can't really change it. You may not want to explain something, you'd much rather say something entertaining, but if the moment requires that explanation, you need to accept that fact, just like you need to accept the position of your audience. So, understanding what we can control, form, content, how we say things, and what we choose to say, that's on us. But then also understanding what we can't control. Ultimately, the way our words, spoken or written, are received by the reader or the listener, and the circumstances in which we're speaking and the purpose which our speech or writing has to fulfill. We can't control those, but that's okay, because understanding that makes you a more reflective and ultimately more effective communicator. So let's bring this back to where we started, which was advanced learners of English figuring out how to assess their communication beyond just linguistic competence. This is the framework that I think we should use. In every task that you get, you should try and figure out what is the purpose here and who is the audience. We accept we can't change those two facts. This is the person we're writing or speaking to, and this is why we're doing it. Those are set. You can't change those. What you can do is triangulate the other two elements to make that combination of purpose and audience work. So you select your content based on the purpose you're trying to achieve with a specific audience. Then you think about how you're going to express that content based on those same two principles. The level of skill and the effectiveness with which you complete that task, and whether you get those choices right, will ultimately determine how effective your communication is, and that's how we should be judging communication at an advanced level in a foreign language, and not just focusing on how many mistakes you may make. That is part of it, but it's not the defining aspect here. It's how well does it achieve the purpose for that audience through the right choice of content and the right choice of form.